Did you know that even after they walk away, a narcissist can't truly stop thinking about you? You might think they're gone, but their mind is still trapped in the web you shared. You've left, you've moved on, but somewhere deep inside, they're replaying every interaction, every compliment, every fight. And that's what keeps them tethered to you, even when they don't admit it. If this resonates with you, hit like and follow, because understanding this is the first step to reclaiming your peace. Let's dive deeper into why this happens and what it really means for you. Narcissists form deep emotional attachments, but these attachments are very different from the bonds most people experience in healthy relationships. While we often connect with others through mutual care, trust, and shared vulnerability, a narcissist's attachment is rooted in control and the need for validation. From the very beginning, they are drawn to people who can feed their ego, affirm their self-image, or serve as a mirror for the identity they want to project. This attachment is less about who you are as a person and more about the function you serve in maintaining their sense of importance. When you first engage with a narcissist, they may idealize you, seeing in you qualities that reflect their desires, dreams, or ambitions. This idealization creates an intense emotional pull, not because of genuine intimacy, but because it satisfies a deep psychological need for affirmation. Over time, even as the relationship becomes more conflictual or painful, the initial attachment doesn't disappear. It persists because the narcissist's mind has entwined their sense of worth with the way you interact with them. When you are present, you feed their ego. When you withdraw, a vacuum is created that they find almost impossible to ignore. The attachment is reinforced by intermittent reinforcement, the mix of affection, approval, and occasional criticism or neglect, which mirrors patterns seen in behavioral psychology that make bonds exceptionally hard to break. Unlike healthy attachments, which can gradually fade when a relationship ends, the narcissist's bond lingers. Their emotional brain continues to replay memories, interactions, and imagined scenarios in an effort to regain that sense of control or to resolve the tension caused by the attachment. This is why even after a breakup or distance, a narcissist may remain fixated on the person they left behind. It is not love in the traditional sense, but an intense preoccupation with what was, combined with a fear of losing access to the source of ego reinforcement. The depth of their attachment is ultimately a reflection of their own unmet emotional needs, insecurities, and reliance on external validation, which keeps the connection alive in ways that are confusing, persistent, and often misunderstood by those who experienced it firsthand. The bond a narcissist feels towards someone is fueled not by love or genuine care, but by the constant validation and admiration they receive from that person. For them, relationships function as a mirror reflecting back the sense of self they desperately want to believe is flawless, powerful, and worthy. Every compliment, act of kindness, or sign of attention becomes a reinforcement of their self-image, and the person providing it becomes an essential part of maintaining that fragile identity. This means that even after leaving or ending a relationship, the narcissist's mind continues to associate the other person with the emotional fuel they once relied upon. Unlike healthy attachments, which can fade when the relationship ends, this bond is psychologically sticky. It persists because the narcissist's brain links the person to a constant source of ego satisfaction, and the absence of this reinforcement creates a mental tension they are uncomfortable ignoring. They might not consciously acknowledge it, but internally they replay memories of the attention, admiration, or compliance they once received, and they imagine ways to regain that sense of control or validation. This is why distance, silence, or moving on by the other person often intensifies their thoughts. They are confronted with the reality that the supply is no longer available, triggering an internal struggle that keeps the attachment alive. The bond is also strengthened by a combination of idealization and devaluation that occurred during the relationship. When a narcissist initially idealizes someone, they place that person on a pedestal, creating a psychological imprint that lingers even after the pedestal is toppled by conflict, criticism, or withdrawal. The contrast between what they once had and what is now missing generates a sense of loss that is disproportionate, not because of love, but because the narcissist is mourning the absence of ego reinforcement. Their attachment is thus not truly about the other person, but about what that person represents to their fragile sense of self. It is this ongoing need for validation and inability to emotionally self-regulate that makes them unable to let go fully, even when the relationship has ended and rationally they might insist they have moved on. When a narcissist leaves a relationship, the emotional bond they formed does not simply vanish. In fact, leaving often intensifies their preoccupation with the person they walked away from, rather than providing relief or closure. This is because the attachment they formed was never grounded in mutual love or partnership, but in a psychological dependence on validation, admiration, and control. The person they leave behind represents a source of emotional supply that their ego has come to rely on, and the sudden absence of this supply creates a void they cannot easily fill. Even if the narcissist believes they are free from the relationship, their mind unconsciously ruminates over interactions, memories, and imagined scenarios, trying to maintain a sense of connection that no longer exists in reality. This preoccupation is compounded by cognitive dissonance. They may rationalize the breakup as a triumph, as liberation, or as a necessary decision, but emotionally, they are confronted with the stark reality of loss. Unlike most people who might gradually detach after a breakup, narcissists often experience a paradoxical pull. They want distance from accountability, from emotional responsibility, or from the discomfort of being vulnerable. Yet they are unable to release the person from their mental and emotional sphere. This is why some narcissists engage in subtle monitoring, fantasize about reunions, or even attempt intermittent contact long after leaving. Their attachment is not based on reciprocity, but on the imprint of the role you played in their life and the ego reinforcement you provided. Even negative interactions, arguments, conflict, or criticism can strengthen the attachment because they keep the other person mentally present, fueling obsessive thought patterns. The bond persists because narcissists struggle to regulate emotions internally. They externalize their needs, and the absence of the other person forces them to confront feelings they are ill-equipped to manage. In this way, leaving does not erase the bond. It highlights it, exposing the depth of dependency the narcissist unknowingly developed. Their inability to truly detach is a reflection of their own unmet emotional needs, insecurities, and reliance on external validation, which keeps the connection alive long after they have physically walked away. Narcissists experience a constant internal tug-of-war between their desire for freedom and their inability to emotionally detach, a phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance. On one hand, they crave independence, They want to avoid responsibility, maintain their self-image of invulnerability, and assert control over their choices. On the other hand, the emotional bond they formed with someone, even if it was toxic or manipulative, continues to hold them tightly. This creates a psychological conflict. Part of them insists that they are done, that the person is no longer relevant, and that they have moved on, while another part remains entangled in memories, imagined scenarios, and lingering feelings they do not fully understand. The disconnect between their rational mind, which claims freedom, and their emotional brain, which clings to attachment, produces a persistent mental tension. Unlike most people who gradually release attachments after a breakup or distance, narcissists often struggle to reconcile these conflicting states. They may attempt to distract themselves, rationalize their behavior, or even seek new sources of validation. Yet the unresolved attachment continually resurfaces. This tension is exacerbated by the fact that the narcissist's self-esteem is largely dependent on external reinforcement. When the person they were attached to is gone, a void forms in their emotional and psychological landscape, forcing them to confront the absence of the supply they once relied on. Silence, withdrawal, or lack of contact only amplifies the internal dissonance, because the gap reminds them of what they have lost while simultaneously challenging their narrative of independence. Even negative interactions, arguments, conflicts, or rejection cannot fully sever this bond, as the attachment is maintained by the emotional imprint of their earlier experiences, including idealization and control. The narcissist's struggle is ultimately about managing internal discomfort. Their mind keeps returning to the connection in an attempt to resolve the cognitive dissonance between wanting autonomy and being unable to release the emotional hold. This is why, even when they appear indifferent or triumphant, they remain secretly preoccupied, replaying memories and imagining ways to restore the sense of attachment they cannot truly abandon. Their inability to fully detach is a reflection of the complex interplay between insecurity, ego reinforcement, and unprocessed emotional dependency, which keeps the bond alive in ways that often surprise those on the outside. Even after a narcissist has left a relationship, memories of how you interacted with them continue to exert a powerful influence over their thoughts and emotions. Every compliment you gave, every moment of attention you offered, every way you accommodated or affirmed them becomes a mental record that reinforces their attachment. Unlike healthy relationships where memories may fade or be integrated into a balanced understanding of the past, narcissists store these moments as proof of their worth and as evidence of the emotional supply they once had. This creates a paradoxical effect. They may devalue you outwardly, criticize your choices, or justify their departure, yet internally they remain preoccupied with the person who once validated their ego. These memories are not neutral. They are emotionally charged, often amplified in the narcissist's mind, and replayed repeatedly. They serve both as a reminder of what they had and as a benchmark against which they measure their current emotional experiences. The intensity of this mental engagement is further heightened by the intermittent nature of the relationship. Moments of idealization followed by devaluation or conflict leave a lasting imprint, making it difficult for the narcissist to release their focus. Even when you move on or disengage completely, your past actions linger in their consciousness, triggering rumination, obsessive reflection, or fantasies about regaining the connection. In many ways, these memories act as a psychological anchor, tethering the narcissist to you long after physical contact has ended. The brain's attachment systems interact with their narcissistic tendencies to create a persistent loop of emotional engagement. They may convince themselves that they have moved on, but deep down, the emotional imprint of your validation and attention keeps you present in their mind. This fixation is not about genuine love or care. It is about a need for reinforcement, affirmation, and the ego boost that only you provided. Your influence continues precisely because the narcissist never fully processed their reliance on your presence, leaving the bond alive in their thoughts, memories, and unspoken preoccupations. Understanding this can be liberating as it shifts the perspective from feeling controlled by their obsession to recognizing that it is their unresolved needs, not your actions, that sustain their mental focus. The bond a narcissist maintains is deeply intertwined with the human brain's natural attachment systems, which interact with their narcissistic traits in ways that make it nearly impossible for them to fully detach. From a neurological perspective, attachment involves circuits in the brain that regulate reward, emotion, and memory. In a typical relationship, these systems help people form connections based on trust, empathy, and reciprocity. For narcissists, however, these same systems become hijacked by their need for validation, admiration, and control. When you are present in their life, their brain registers interactions with you as sources of emotional reward, even if those interactions were inconsistent or fraught with conflict. Your attention, compliance, or affirmation triggers the release of neurochemicals associated with pleasure and reinforcement, creating a loop that strengthens the bond. Over time, this neural conditioning forms a powerful attachment that is not easily broken, even when you leave or disengage. The absence of your presence disrupts their internal equilibrium, producing a craving for the reward they once received from you. Unlike someone with a balanced attachment system who can gradually adapt and shift focus, the narcissist's attachment circuits remain hyper-focused, replaying memories, imagining reunions, or evaluating what went wrong. This is why they may appear preoccupied, obsessed, or even haunted by your absence, despite insisting they have moved on. The paradox is that while their conscious mind may reject responsibility, accountability, or emotional intimacy, their brain's reward and attachment mechanisms continue to reinforce the connection. Silence, distance, or lack of engagement from you only amplifies the effect, as it triggers rumination and the desire to resolve the missing supply. Their mental and emotional energy remains invested in the relationship long after it has ended, not because of genuine love, but because the bond has been neurologically encoded as a source of validation and ego reinforcement. This complex interplay between biology and narcissistic traits ensures that the attachment persists, making it nearly impossible for them to sever ties fully. Even when they consciously attempt to move on, the unconscious pull of these attachment systems keeps you mentally present, creating a lasting connection that defies logic, distance, and time. When you stop engaging with a narcissist, when you withdraw, go silent, or set firm boundaries, it can trigger a reaction far stronger than you might expect. Narcissists are not used to being ignored or having their control disrupted, and their minds are wired to fixate on the source of what they cannot have. This is why ghosting, silence, or disengagement often provokes obsessive rumination. Unlike healthy individuals who can accept absence and gradually let go, narcissists struggle to switch off the connection mentally or emotionally. Your absence creates a void in their internal world, a gap where the validation, Attention and ego reinforcement you provided used to exist. That gap becomes intolerable, prompting them to replay past interactions, analyze your behavior, and imagine ways to restore the connection. Even if they consciously tell themselves they have moved on, their brain continues to process you as a critical emotional anchor. This reaction is intensified by the unpredictability of past interactions. If your previous behavior involved a mix of affirmation, attention, and occasional withdrawal, your absence now mirrors that pattern, making it even more compelling. The uncertainty keeps their mind engaged because humans are naturally wired to seek closure and resolution, and narcissists are no exception, except they rarely process emotions internally. Instead, they externalize the need, making you the persistent subject of their mental focus. The effect can manifest as intrusive thoughts, imagining scenarios, replaying fights, or fantasizing about reconciliation. Silence does not equate to freedom for a narcissist. It equates to an unsolved problem, a challenge to their ego, and a disruption of the supply they have come to depend on. It forces them to confront feelings they are unequipped to handle alone, magnifying the bond in ways they cannot easily escape. Even negative memories or conflicts can reinforce the attachment because your presence, whether real or imagined, continues to dominate their mental space. Ultimately, their inability to switch off the connection is a reflection of unresolved emotional dependency, insecurity, and the neurological imprint left by the bond, which persists far longer than any physical separation or conscious intention could erase. The inability of narcissists to break the bond is ultimately rooted in deep-seated insecurity, fear of loss, and unprocessed emotions, all of which keep the connection alive long after a relationship ends. Unlike people with healthy self-esteem, narcissists rely heavily on external validation to feel worthy, significant, and in control. When a relationship ends or distance is created, they are confronted with the sudden absence of the very supply that upheld their self-image. This triggers fear, not necessarily of you personally, but of what your absence represents. A loss of ego reinforcement, a challenge to their identity, and a confrontation with feelings they have long avoided. Even if they rationalize the breakup or act indifferent, their internal emotional system struggles to reconcile the reality of loss with their need to maintain superiority and control. Unprocessed emotions such as shame, regret, or longing continue to circulate beneath the surface, creating a persistent preoccupation. These feelings cannot easily be integrated or resolved because narcissists typically suppress vulnerability and avoid introspection, leaving the bond active in their subconscious. The fear of loss manifests in obsessive thoughts, replaying past interactions, or imagining scenarios where the connection is restored, and it can drive them to reach out in subtle ways long after physical separation. In essence, their attachment is less about love and more about the unresolved tension between needing you to reinforce their ego and the inability to tolerate your absence. Even the smallest triggers, a memory, a social media post, or the knowledge that you have moved on, can reignite this emotional loop, keeping you mentally present in their mind. This explains why, despite appearances, narcissists often cannot fully let go. The bond is sustained by a combination of insecurity, unprocessed emotions, and reliance on external validation, which perpetuate a mental and emotional tether to you. Understanding this can be empowering because it highlights that the persistent connection exists not because of lingering control over you, but because of their own unresolved psychological patterns. Their inability to break free is a reflection of their internal struggles, ensuring that the bond endures even when the relationship